This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 70 of Here's How. When Britain sneezes, Ireland catches a cold, and Britain is currently being convulsed by the Brexit virus. So we're probably interested in a new British party established to keep Britain in the EU. Let's talk to one of its founders.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
On the line now, I have Sandra Khadhouri. Sandra is a former journalist. She's worked with the CNN and Euronews. She's also been a conflict advisor for NATO and the UK government in various conflict zones. But she's entered a different conflict zone now, and she is one of the leaders and the head of communications of a new British political party founded late last year called Renew. Sandra, what's the main focus of Renew?
Well, we were set up as a new party last September after the elections by a group of independent candidates, and I joined them straight after. And our platform is basically Rethink Brexit, Renew Britain. We feel like the country is going in the wrong direction. It's making an incalculable wrong decision, leaving the European Union, and we actually need to address our grievances at home, and we can't do like that while we leave the European Union.
So you are primarily an anti-Brexit party, would that be correct?
We actually aim to offer the whole package. We want to say that we shouldn't leave the European Union for all sorts of reasons, because it's economically damaging and we'll lose all aspects of cooperation. But we want to say we do need to go deeper and see what it was that people were upset about when they voted Brexit, and actually address some of those inequalities that people were protesting about. People were protesting at a rigged system, north-south divide in the country, inequalities economically and geographically, and we want to try and address that at the national level.
Okay, well, let's break that down into two. One, the Brexit, and two, the reasons, perhaps the non-Brexit reasons why people might have voted for Brexit. I once heard somebody say that the only thing worse than being wrong when everybody's listening is being right when nobody's listening. Do you feel that a little bit?
Well, I feel that it took a long time for people to get their act together after the June 23rd referendum. We seem to be brainwashed somehow that we couldn't go back and that we had to leave the EU on the back of that result. And it's taken a long time for people to actually coordinate and actually start to engage with the population about what was really behind it. And I'm still not sure we've actually got to grips with it. Obviously, we would have loved to set up our party a year ago, but it seemed the moment wasn't right for that then. Now it is, but we are racing against the clock. We know that by September, October, with a new deal on the table and Parliament about to vote, it will be very hard to start turning the clock back then. And our European partners are going to be very upset the longer this goes on, to then actually say, no, OK, we'll let you stay now if that is what the British public so desires.
OK, so hold on with that for a second, because I can see how maybe a few months ago having a pro-Brexit party might have been an anti-Brexit party might have been a good idea. But then recently, Jeremy Corbyn, maybe he's shot your fox, because Jeremy Corbyn, his, history on the hard left of the Labour Party might have been actually quite anti-EU before he became the leader. But he has now recently said that the Labour Party's official policy is to remain in the customs union, which was not understood at the time of the Brexit referendum. The Tory party seemed to have taken it as whether they must leave. Isn't that probably the best that you could hope for? And if you were hoping for that, wouldn't be the sensible thing to do be to vote Labour?
Well, it's very interesting to see Jeremy Corbyn shift and accept the need to stay in the customs union. And to that extent, we welcome that. However, it doesn't go far enough. We need to be part of the single market as well. All businesses are crying out for that in all sectors and all areas. And even the government's own leaked impact assessment reports show that all parts of the country will be hit by reduced trade and reduced economic growth, especially the North East and the Midlands, which voted for leave. So we see that Corbyn is playing political political games here, in a sense. He's actually disappointing a lot of his own youth voters and working voters who are also worried about leaving the European Union. So we don't really trust Jeremy Corbyn on this issue. He's obviously not pro-European, and he's made comments against NATO as well and any kind of globalized approach. We think he'll take the country backwards, in a sense. But yes, it is encouraging that people are moving towards the idea that we are going to be losing a lot if we leave the institutions and the mechanisms of the European Union.
Okay, well, you're clear on what you're against. It's not clear on how you would see moving forward. The Tory DUP government seems to be pretty firmly in power, certainly a lot more firmly in power than Theresa May personally. And they're perhaps a year away from actually leaving the EU, which means being probably about 6 months away from having some sort of an agreement with the EU on leaving. There's no prospect of an election before then. What do you plan to do? Are you going to run in the next election? Are you going to have candidates running? Are you looking to reverse Brexit after it happens, or do you think you can actually trip it up beforehand?
Well, you're right that it is a challenge, but at our Renew Party, we want to put Remain back on the table, both for politicians in Parliament when they come to vote on the final deal in October, but also put Remain back on the table for the population. We think that the tide is turning and that people are realising how contradictory this aim is and the illusory gains that we're supposed to get from leaving the EU. We think people are realising that was a false promise. So we want to capitalise on that along with
Are you sure? Are you sure they're realising that? Because I'm not sure that they are, at least not in numbers. And it might be the case that minds are not going to be focused on, and I'm thinking of the famous Japanese car plants in the north of Britain, one of which alone moves 2 million parts from the continent to Britain per day. Until something goes wrong, isn't it likely that the very deeply ingrained anti-authoritarianism that got Brexit passed, it's not going to be challenged until there's visible problems, is it?
Well, there are definite signs of problems. I mean, certainly, EU nationals have stopped coming in large numbers, and actually businesses are complaining about a shortfall in the labour market. But I think people are realising that our doctors and nurses, 10% come from the European Union, and people are worried about that now. Look, you're right. The polls are not decisively shifting, but they have shown a shift towards Remain. And polls also show people are very upset at the way the government has handled negotiations. There's not been consensus, and there has been a lot of contradictory approaches towards the EU. The EU is not bending over backwards for us, and people are aware of that. People are also upset that we have to pay 60 to 100 billion pounds to actually leave the European Union, and they are also realising that once we're out, we will no longer have a role in decision making, and the EU has made that quite clear. So
your plan? What's your plan exactly?
Our plan is to keep doing what we're doing. We have a Listen to Britain tour at the moment where we're going around.
That's your party plan. I'm thinking of your Brexit plan. Do you think that there is some way to trip up this 1 year escalator that lands at Brexit? Can you stop that within a year, or are you looking at rejoining the EU at some later stage?
We definitely want to try and stop the Brexit process happening before it actually happens. After we formally leave the EU in March 2019, we will lose a lot. We will not be able to enter on the same terms, and it will be a very difficult process, and we will see some decline in the UK, as well as a possible breakup of parts of the UK. So
if your plan is not to go out, what's the mechanism? How would you hope to achieve that?
Well, first of all, we're trying to persuade people to rethink their decision. And we are going around the country and talking to people. And there are plenty of other campaign groups who are actually very actively doing that as well. We're also hoping that pressure from the public and their concern and their anxiety will put pressure on MPs in Parliament. And we hope that there will be a call for a vote, a new vote on the final deal, a public vote, where people can actually finally have enough information to make an informed decision about what leaving the EU really looks like. They didn't have that information before. We had no idea what a deal would look like, and now we're getting the semblance of it. But even then, the government is still confused and contradictory, so we don't even know what that looks like now.
And because obviously our audience is Irish, and the primary focus of most Irish people is the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, it seems to me that the UK government at the moment are aiming at having something like Schrödinger's border. Both exists and does not exist at the same time. That's clearly illogical, but isn't that a strength of their position at the moment, that they're just not saying anything, and it's difficult to criticise a specific plan when they have no specific plan?
Well, I think the time for fudge is over, really. It is time to get down to the nitty-gritty and say, how are you practically going to do this? And this is where the government
clearly haven't a clue.
The government's running into huge problems. Ireland wasn't even discussed during the referendum campaign. Neither was security or our reputation or all sorts of issues. But I think, the EU has put their marker down and said they won't see any harm caused to the Good Friday Peace Agreement, and they don't want any harm caused to Ireland, obviously their priority, and in terms of trade as well. So this common regulatory area that they're proposing for Ireland, the island of Ireland, is obviously proving problematic for the government. And then, of course, the DUP don't want there to be any border in the Irish Sea between the island and the mainland.
Between Northern Ireland and the UK and Britain. Yeah,
exactly.
That's clear.
So these are intractable problems.
Sure, and if there clearly cannot be a regulatory border between Ireland and the rest of the EU. It is agreed that there is no regulatory border between the Republic and the North, and if the DUP then insist on no regulatory border between the North and Britain, then that means Britain must follow the UK. Britain must follow the EU regulations to the letter without having any input into them. That's clearly not what they anticipated. The other thing that could happen is that Britain crashes out of the EU with no agreement. That's possible, isn't it?
I think it is possible, but I think what we would probably see is an extension even for Article 50 actually taking effect, and that actually we wouldn't end up leaving in March 2019 in the end. And I think that's highly plausible. And of course, a long extension of the transition period as well. There are a lot of unknowns here and a lot of things that weren't considered. Even if we go along with the WTO rules, there's a lot of implications there as well. So it's extremely complicated, and the public did not have any idea about this. Really, everyone was told it would be so easy to leave and there would be this promised land of global trade deals and wonderful independence and sovereignty, which we already had. And now I think it's becoming clearer, and it's only going to get worse. In my mind.
You're obviously a smart person. You've worked for different international news organizations. You've worked around the world for different international organizations. There was a book written by a guy called David Goodhart, published last year, called The Road to Somewhere, The Populist Revolt and the Future of Politics. And essentially he classified two types of people, and he called them the anywheres and the somewheres. And the anywheres, I think, were people like you. There are people who had very high level of international connections through their job, probably through personal connections and so forth. And the somewheres, people who had a strong affinity not only with their country, but probably with the region of the country that they lived in. And unquestionably, as he defines them, as David Goodhart defines them, the somewheres were the people who voted for Brexit. Aren't they really being left out, or hadn't they up to then at least been left out of the national conversation about the future of the UK? And isn't that why they revolted in the way they did?
I think that's absolutely true. I think there's huge problems of identity in our country, which we've ignored, and we've never actually looked at it properly. And also issues of immigration that we've never really discussed in a mature way, and it always being quite a hotbed. I think it sounds like a fascinating book. I've heard about it and I must read it. And I think it's absolutely true. We do live in our bubbles, and this debate now is about being open and closed. And it is about people who have had experience of working internationally or understand the UK's global role and how that helps us at home, and people who've perhaps stayed more in their own areas and actually had a different kind of life and a different experience. And I think this is a huge crisis moment that we're in, but we really do have to dig deeper now and go and talk to people about why they're disconnected from politics, but also, how it feels for them to be British.
Roll that back a little bit. Isn't that a bit condescending? Isn't it possibly also the case that you have to, just saying that you have to convince the somewheres, isn't it possible that the anywheres have to buck up their ideas as well?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've spent a lot of time overseas. I appreciate that. But I'm born and bred in Manchester and care deeply and patriotically about my country. But you're absolutely right. We've failed here, and successive governments have failed, perhaps, to look at what was ailing British people and why some people weren't progressing as well as others, and why some were angry about, this rapid change in our society, especially since the 2008 financial crisis, where life did not get better and living standards have stagnated for many. I think you're right. I think we all have to take a good look now. We can't go forward. We're not even advocating going back to the status quo by remaining in the EU. We know we have to come towards some new deal, some new kind of economic and social policy that actually offers something much more hopeful for everybody. And if that means we all have to take a step back to do it, then so be it. But we also want to make sure we are open and progressive and ready to cope with the technological change that's coming and face these big challenges. We can't retreat into isolation. So it is straddling these two movements, if you like, that we're going to have to find a way to do if we want to move forward together.
Yeah, David Davis, the British minister, said recently, and ardent pro-Brexiteer, he said that after Brexit, Britain will not be some sort of Mad Max wasteland, which I have to say is setting the bar remarkably low for his expectations. If he's claiming that, there's at least a chance that he's wrong. Is it possible that there would be really catastrophic damage to Britain if the UK crashed out of the EU, reverted to WTO rules, had mass closures in particular of factories that rely on supply chains across the English Channel? There is a danger of really catastrophic damage there, isn't there?
Personally, I think it is catastrophic leaving the European Union without a deal or in any sense, because, all businesses are worried about this. Every sector, food and drink, retail, hospitality, medical, health sector, manufacturing. Everybody's worried about losing our trade with the European Union or having it reduced. And I think we really should pay attention. But it's not only that, it's collaboration in many areas: security, environment, food hygiene, all these 40 EU agencies that we are currently a member of. These are wonderful areas of cooperation. What's going to happen to that? And I think it's just not been considered when the vote was made. Will it be a Mad Max scenario? Well, there'll be decline and it will lead to more division. We're already divided. It will lead to more. So, we really have to worry. This is a crunch time for the UK.
Sandra Khadhouri, one of the founders of Renew, a new British political party. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you very much.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost it for episode 70 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 6th of February 2018. I have links and references for everything we were talking about in the show notes on the website. And if you can think of a topic that should be covered in a future show, or if you want to suggest someone to include, that could be yourself, then let me know. And if you like the podcast, spread the word by sharing the show on Facebook, following on Twitter @Here'sHowPodcast, and most important, subscribe so new shows automatically come up in your podcast feed. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. And you can subscribe by email now. There's full information about all of that and contact details for the show at www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.